sure it's working. Hello, hello, hello. Hello, hello, hello. Make sure it's working. Hello, hello, hello.
Right. Sounds like
Hello,
we're
hello,
good,
hello.
guys. All right. So, welcome to the yours truly Baphomet YouTube channel, and we are today going into the fourth trip. So this is the fifth day in a row I've been doing this. So there'll probably be a bit of a break in between, so I can make shorts and do other things since I'm now back at uni and I really need to get my ass into gear. But because I sort of fucked around last night, and not in the not in the coitus kind, but I mean, like, I just didn't really do much or get much done. I feel bad, and I need to get a video out and try and compensate for what I did, because I'm really starting to feel the need to organize myself more than anything. But yeah, so the third trip that I talked about recently was in Timothy Leary. He was talking about like this trip that was still at the house, but also he went on a flying trip, and he was also underwater and all that other kind of thing. He was in the sky, and that would have been nerve-wracking, I can imagine. And like sort of talking about the wisdom of the young, which is kind of interesting that he was talking about that, because I came across someone who was quite young, and you know, he was actually quite knowledgeable in a lot of things as well, and had weird sorts of wisdom. Because you got to remember, if we're entangled with the universe and we start from a 0-point field, in a sense, children kind of actually already know everything, but it's sort of then there's this divergence of like tending to infinity, zero sum ability, in a sense, with consciousness. Yeah. So children are actually quite holy in a lot of respects, and the young way more holy than the old fucks that we see in Parliament and Congress, as I mentioned before. Anyway, let's begin trip number 4, ladies and gentlemen. October 1960, guide Aldous Huxley. Oh man, I am gonna have a fucking blast with this, guys, because Aldous Huxley was actually probably the one who sort of set the spark aflame when I was like 22, and I first read Brave New World, and that was such a thought-provoking book. It pushed me into the mysteries, so that was interesting. So yeah, the Dark Paradox. The sacrament solves no problems. Okay. So it might be talking about like how psychedelics maybe don't entirely solve it, which is true, by the way. And I was watching a podcast just a couple of days ago about Maynard James Keenan, sort of like knowing plenty of people, dozens, who sort of went off the deep end because they just did it too much. And yeah, that's a bit of a warning. It's not to say that this doesn't help you, but it is incredibly important that you don't make it your entire existence just to get high and try and because I think because everything contains its contradiction and its opposite, right? The very thing that can actually bring you to reality can probably pull you away from reality too. All right. October 1960, Guide Aldous Huxley, Oracle XXXV1, or 36. Darkening of the light, the receptive earth, the clinging fire, the like are sunk into the earth. The image of darkening of the light, thus does the superior man live with the great mass. He veils his light, yet still shines. Some maybe don't like cast your pearls before swine, but here we are. All right, let's read one of these on the side. Lease witnesseth that for in consideration of the payment of rents and the performance of the covenants, said parties of the first part do hereby lease, demise, and let unto the said parties of the second part, that certain 3-story dwelling house and appurtenances. All right. We got back to the East Coast early September and located in Newton Center. The house was big, a three-story baronial mansion on a hill with trees and lawns and a three-car garage and a garden house and 185 stone steps leading up to the front door. Inside it were books and woodwork and thick rugs and metal work lamps and a wide staircase winding up from this entrance hall. Took a couple of days to get settled, and on the third day, I drove down to the Newton corner and crossed the Charles Bank Road along the curving river towards Cambridge. At this point, the Charles is a wide, slow stream. On the other side, a Norman tower sticks up from the trees, and down away the bridge on the Watertown Road loops across in the three arches. Simple and clean like Ponte Santa Trinita, reflected in the water below. After a while, the river swings to the left towards Cambridge and then back again in a grand slow sweep. And there on the right is Soldiers Field, and beyond the roofs of the Harvard Business School, very European, Copenhagen mostly, apparently, with dozens of little chimneys sticking up, and over the left are the three shiny coloured domes, red, green, blue, and the Harvard brick, all clear like colour slides. I was glad to be back and glad that it all looked so fresh and sharp. Even the traffic lights seemed to glisten gem flashes red and green. The fact that they told you to stop and go was incidental to what they told you about color and light. That's an interesting thought. I was still turned on. My office was in the center for personality research, Harvard University. The house was named after Morton Prince, one of the first American psychologists to recognize alterations in consciousness as a critical area for study in the days when psychologists were gentlemen scholars. He published classic works on unconscious states, the varieties of awareness consequences, and was the founder of the Center for Personality Research at Harvard. Today, he would be considered a far-out scholar with his curious and bold interest in multiple personalities, hypnosis, trances, and visions. It was somehow most natural and proper that we would be initiating studies into altered states of consciousness in Morton Prince House. The president for our psychedelic research did not begin with Morton Prince, however, but traced back to the turn of the century to that most venerable and greatest of American psychologists, William James, who had mystic experiences using nitrous oxide and saw God and scandalized people by running drug parties in Boston's stuffy Back Bay. I'll read that from the Saturday Evening Post. Leary returned to Harvard, longing to journey still further beyond his mind, and his ardor infected Alpert, another clinical psychologist, and McClelland protege from the varieties of religious experience by William James. Our normal waking consciousness parted from the filmiest of screens, there lies potential forms of consciousness entirely different. True. Okay, let's continue. After Morton Prince and William James, the genealogical line of consciousness expansion, research at Harvard was continued by another giant in the history of psychology, Harry A. Murray, and his visionary screen of green shirts. While white whales, Freud, Jung, Melville, when Harry Murray retired and moved his office to a house next door and nailed his whale emblem over the threshold, a new director came into the center. David C. McClelland is not a visionary Quaker, a Protestant ethic man, intelligent, tall, Puritan, dedicated to external achievement. Professor McClelland had visited the villa in Kernakava the week after I took the magic mushrooms and was shocked and grumpy when I told him about my trip. He was the first person I had wanted to try the mushrooms, and his instinctive withdrawal jolted me. Okay. No account of the universe in its totality can be final, which leaves these other forms of consciousness quite disregarded. Interesting. The Quakers were found by a flipped-out hallucinating visionary named George Fox, who turned out and dropped out and spent 6 years in prison for passing on the same message I got from the Aztec plan. I couldn't understand then why any psychologist, especially a member of a mystic sect like the Quakers, wouldn't rush to have the experience. When I opened the front door of Harvard Center for Personality Research, there in the library were two bright graduate students, George and Mike. They came to my office and began telling me right away about their summer research, and then I began telling them about the mushrooms. This was nothing new to them. George had spent several months running mescaline experiments the year before and used to drop into my office to tell me about the visions and insights and perceptual fireworks. I used to listen politely but not caring. I had no concepts, no mental hooks on which to hang his words, and no intuitive electricity to get turned on. Like every educated savage, I automatically discredit anything that I didn't understand. You know, this is actually quite common today in today's world, even among scientists. Even though scientists know that it's about trying to understand the ununderstandable, they'll still dismiss it because but science has already disproved it. But science is always in flux. Understanding is always in flux. An example I always like to use is with wine barrels, when wine was actually first made back in the day in the medieval era. The winemakers would actually follow a certain method, and it worked every time. But they thought it was God blessing it. But that's not how it happened. But the medium in how they made it still worked. The method worked. That doesn't mean that's why it works. Big difference. Just like some of the science around geocentric astronomy actually did fit certain models. But of course, we actually now know that we go around the sun and not the sun around us. So let's continue. So it sounds like even Timothy Leary was sometimes prone to doing that kind of thing. Now it was different. The visionary flash had come, and George had seen and felt it too, and we leaned forward. I should probably put that one there. Now it was different. The visionary flash had come, and George had seen and felt it too, and we leaned forward, talking fast and drugging each other with vision talk. Mike was swept into the spell too. He had been wanting George to give him mescaline for several months, but they never got around to it. He was eager to start. What a great research tool. The word research stopped me. Psychiatric science, good God, here we go again. Using drugs to do something to somebody else, drug them, then test the changes. Measuring the impact of chemicals on the mind. It was this sort of manipulatory business that had repelled me from experimental drug research in the past. Look back on my drug experience, they all converge to a kind of insight to which I cannot help ascribe some metaphysical significance. Those who have ears to hear, let them hear. To me, the living sense of a reality only comes in the artificial mystic state of mind. A ring of power looks after itself, Frodo. It may slip off treacherously, but its keeper never abandons it. At most, he plays with the idea of handing it on to somebody else's care, and that only at an early stage when it first begins to grip. But as far as I know, Bilbo alone in history has ever gone beyond playing and really done it. He needed all my help too, and even so, he would never have just forsaken it or cast it aside. It was not Gollum, Frodo, but the ring itself that decided things. The ring left him. I think that's sort of talking about like how certain things play out, and I think the allegory here is psychedelics, and because the ring obviously puts the wearer into a different altered state where they can actually sort of see the world and sort of divinate and that kind of thing. So yeah, that's the allegory there. For thousands of years, men had used any chemicals they could get their hands on to change consciousness, and for 50 years, psychologists have been developing methods including probing people's minds. Getting behind the screens and project protections which we all maintain, what does the patient really think? What does he really feel? Psychoanalysis, the study of dreams, slips of the tongue, test of fantasy expression in which the subject unwittingly gives away his secret inclinations. It was natural that men would use mescaline and LSD to get high, and it was also natural that psychologists would see mescaline and LSD as new manipulatory instruments for cutting through defenses and exposing inner feelings. New ways of knocking on the social man and laying bare the sick, evil man within. You know, that's actually kind of important because I think that's always the biggest fear, because we all have darkness that we would rather not confront. And this is way more common than people think. Okay? It's like, never underestimate how much darkness can be be in the average man or woman. It doesn't matter. Like, and we all like to think that we're good people by the simple virtue that we don't break the law, that we fit in social conventions, and also, I guess, the fact that you're feeding your kids, and it's like, okay, you know what? I've done the bare minimum, so I'm a good person, which is not the case at all. You need to do a little bit more than that to sort of come to self-realization and such. All right, let's continue. To interpret the visionary experience, laymen use the language of ecstasy, and psychiatrists use the language which is familiar and natural to them, the dialect of diagnosis. Now, the curious thing about psychiatric language is that it's almost completely negative, a pompous, gloomy lexicon of troubles, symptoms, abnormalities, eccentricities. To read through the psychiatric literature is to descend into the modern Freudian inferno, prim, prudish catalogue of anguish and conflict. The psychiatric trip is worried and nervous. Revelation is a dirty word. Oh, damn. When they observe mystical reactions to the southern vegetables, psychiatrists employ the labels of pathology. Peyote and mescaline and LSD produce thoughts and behavior which are not conventionally normal. These events are called abnormal, very unconventional, therefore very abnormal, psychotic. There you go. Psychosis from altered states and that kind of thing. The psychiatrists are hung up on psychosis, whatever that is, and so the new consciousness expands substances in 1960 were classed as psychotomimetic. Psychotomimetic. Interesting. Actually, I want to look up what that word is quickly, guys. What that actually means. Psychotomimetic. That's a long word. Relating or denoting drugs which are capable of producing an effect on the mind similar to a psychotic state. Okay. Interesting. All right, let's continue. Psychiatrists thought that LSD causes normal people to act like psychotics, and glorious mescaline too, and the mushroom. So when I heard Mike asking me about research plans for the mushrooms, my first reaction was, oh, no, baby. No. No selecting of subjects. No testing them before and after. No explaining away the mushroom effect in terms of my favorite variable or your favorite variables. No chemical procedures ripping away people's protections and watching them deal with the sudden confrontation of the real reality and then calling them diagnostic names like psychotic. No, sir. There we go. So, like, you got to be careful with research like that, especially when you're dealing with other people's minds. Because obviously, a profane doctor who's obviously not tried them themselves, I think it's probably better that, because otherwise they would call them, oh, they're insane, instead of actually trying it themselves, which is actually a really fucking important part of it. And I'm assuming that these doctors that Leary was talking about did not try them themselves. Well, Mike, it depends what you mean by research. I love to take the mushrooms again. I'd like to give them to my friends and have them see what I saw. In fact, I'd be glad to spend the rest of my life teaching people how to use them. And I'd like everyone who takes the mushrooms to write down afterwards what he saw and felt and visioned and how the whole scene affected his life. George and Mike were listening and nodding and swinging along with this and began to throw in ideas. Why not start a research like this? There would be no scientists versus people studied in our research. Everyone would take turns taking the mushrooms and observing and keeping careful records on how we change and what we experience. And we all meet together to plan the sessions, and there would be no withholding of information or results. It would all be out on the table for everyone to know. No calling people names, no diagnosing, and we would try to get a variety of people involved in the group. Not just psychologists and behavioral scientists, but writers and poets and housewives and cab drivers. Yeah, wide variety of subjects is always quite important. I was particularly pleased with the collaborative, no leader aspect of the plan. I wanted to avoid selecting the member of the mushroom research group. I told George and Mike that they knew more people around the university and the town of Cambridge than I did, and they should do the selecting of collaborators to take the mushrooms with us. George and Mike said sure and began talking together, excitedly throwing names back and forth, plenty of spirit around. Then George began to talk about the literature on visionary states and asked me if I had read Aldous Huxley's book on mescaline, Doors to Perception and Heaven and Hell. Those two books are actually quite good, and I highly recommend them to anyone who hasn't read them yet. And I think that's kind of interesting that, like, the first person to get me into mysteries, in a sense, Aldous Huxley was also the one who greatly promoted psychedelics and mescaline was also my first trip. Yeah. When I said I hadn't, he rushed down to the hall of his office and brought them back, small, thin rectangles. I stuffed them in my jacket pockets. The final issue was the big one. Where will we get the mushrooms? Someone had told me that the Public Health Service has succeeded in synthesizing the mushrooms, and I said I'd write to Washington and try to check out on that lead. Gerhardt, back in Mexico, had told me that he'd continue the search for Juana, the witch, and if he found her, he'd get a large supply and send some up to me. And Frank Barron, back in Berkeley, had told me that the people at the University of Mexico had cultivated mushrooms and maybe we could get some from them. That night, I read Huxley, and then I read those two books again and again. It was all there, all my vision and all more too. Huxley had taken mescaline in a garden and shucked off the mind and awakened to eternity. You shouldn't point out faults in others that might exist in yourself. After the drug, he said. At who? That depends on a lot of things. Ooh. About a week later, someone at a party told me that Aldous Huxley was spending the fall in town and that sounded like a good omen. So I sat down and wrote him a letter. 2 days later, during one of our planning conferences, Mr. Huxley telephoned to say he was interested and lunch was arranged. Oh, damn. Huxley and Leary together. Also, Huxley and Crowley have been together as well, which is also kind of interesting. Aldous Huxley was staying in a new MIT apartment overlooking the Charles River. He answered the bell toll. Pale, frail joined me, and we drove to the Harvard Faculty Club. He read the menu slowly through his magnifying glass. I asked him if he wanted soup, and he asked what kind, and I looked at the menu, and it was mushroom soup, so we laughed, and we had mushrooms for lunch. Aldous Huxley, stooped, towering grey Buddha, a wise and good man. He, like a multilingual encyclopedia, voice elegant and chuckling, except when the pitch rose in momentary, amused indignation about overpopulation or the pomposity of psychiatrists. Damn, even fucking Huxley didn't like psychiatrists. That's interesting. I think that sort of goes back to, people really ought to actually try and understand their own psychology. And it can be difficult because you've got to make sure that you don't lie to yourself and that kind of thing. And that can be quite difficult. So in a sense, like, psychiatrists only really exist to enforce the state to a certain extent. And that's all there is to it. We talked about how to study and use the consciousness expanding drugs, and we clicked along agreeably on the do's and not to do's. We would avoid the behaviorist approach to others' awareness, avoid labeling or depersonalizing the subject. We would not impose our own jargon or our own experimental games on others. We were not out to discover new laws, which is to say to discover the redundant implications of our own premises. We were not to be limited by the pathological point of view. We were not to interpret it interpret ecstasy as mania or calm serenity as catatonia. We were not to diagnose Buddha as a detached schizoid, nor Christ as an exhibitionist masochist. Oh, damn. Nor the mystic experience as a symptom, nor the visionary states as a model psychosis. Aldous Huxley chuckling away with compassionate humor at human folly. Yeah, we really do too much of that, just laughing at the, intellectuals can be very much like that in that regard. It's unfortunate because they should be really serving the state. They should be working against it if they really want to help mankind. Anyway, and with such erudition, moving back and forth in history, quoting the mystics, Wordsworth, Plotinus, the Areopagite, William James, ranging from the esoteric past back to the biochemical present. Humphrey Osmond curing alcoholics in Saskatchewan, with LSD. Keith Dittman's plans to clean out Skid Row in Los Angeles with LSD. Roger Haim taking his bag of Mexican mushrooms to the Parisian chemist who couldn't isolate the active ingredient, and then going to Albert Hofmann, the great Swiss, who did it and called it psilocybin. They had sent the pills back to the curandera in Oaxaca State, and she tried them and had divinatory visions and was happy that her practice could not now be year-round and not restricted to the 3 rainy mushroom months. Aldous Huxley was shrewdly aware of the political complications and the expected opposition from the Marugans, the name he gave to power people in his novel Island. I've heard that Island is actually a fucking terrible book. But because it's a utopia, written by Huxley. Now I might try and read it because it's weird because people talk about it a lot and they talk about how bad it is, but it doesn't check out. Why would people be talking about it if it wasn't important? I'll make that a note for myself, actually. Because, people wouldn't really be talking about it so much if it wasn't... There would have to be something to it. Because even, there's no such thing as bad publicity. And that's all there is to it. Anyway, continuing on. Dope Murrigan. Okay, I guess this is a quote from the island. Dope Murrigan was telling me about the fungi that are used here as a source of dope. What's in a name? Answer, practically everything. Murrigan calls it dope and feels about all the disapproval that, by conditioned reflex, the dirty word evokes. We, on the contrary, give the stuff good names. The moksha medicine, the reality revealer, the truth and beauty pill. And we know by direct experience that the good names are deserved, whereas our young friend here has no first-hand knowledge on the stuff and can't be persuaded even to give it a try. For him, it's dope, and dope is something that, by definition, no decent person ever indulges in. That's actually, it's kind of sad that we get negative experiences, or negative perceptions on a lot of this stuff, because it's true that we have people who sort of talk about certain drugs in a negative way, like dope or googs and that kind of thing when you're referring to MDMA. And sometimes the language is actually what causes people to actually drift away from things. Because it can also go with how people sort of perceive certain movements. Like I remember in Disco Elysium, a game I played, there was basically the army of humanity, but it was an army that absolutely fucking ruined everything. But because it was called Army of Humanity, and if you went against it, you were against humanity. So it's the same sort of precept and concept that usually people use. It's the language. Language is really fucking important. And that's why I prefer to call... I usually prefer the word entheogens or plant medicine over psychedelic, even for that reason. And that's important. Anyway, let's continue. Aldous Huxley advised and counseled and joked and told stories, and we listened, and our research project was shaped accordingly. Huxley offered to sit in our planning meetings and was ready to take mushrooms with us when the research was underway. From these meetings grew the design for a naturalistic pilot study in which the subject would be treated like astronauts, carefully prepared, briefed with all available facts, and then expected to run their own spacecraft, make their own observations, and report back to ground control. Our subjects were not passive patients, but hero explorers. Yeah, again, perception, like how you're studying people. Instead of like seeing them as like subjects, you see them as the researchers themselves, because they're the ones who are going in. During the weeks of October and November of 1960, there were many meetings to plan their research. Aldous Huxley would come and listen and then close his eyes and detach himself from the scene and go into his controlled meditation trance, which was unnerving to some of the Harvard people who equate consciousness with talk. And then he would open his eyes and make a diamond pure comment. I actually remember Luminostic using that term the first time. Yeah. So like he would just apparently say something incredible and then just go back to meditation, which is interesting to think about. We talked about having tape recordings and music and reproductions of paintings and mystical quotations, and people would volunteer to round up the props, and there was only one thing wrong with the meetings, and that was that it was all talk and no action. That is, no mushrooms. It was like sitting around planning and talking about sex. We were all hungry and patient for the mushrooms to arrive. Damn. We hoped that they would come that week, and if we sowed, we'd have the first session on Sunday. By Friday, they hadn't come, and we'd made careful plans to pick up the package at the post office if it came on Saturday. I didn't realize until later how eager and anxious people were. The tension was mounting, and it kept mounting Saturday morning until George phoned everyone and said that they weren't at the post office, and the first session was postponed a week. Big letdown, and the tension started up again. Damn. On Wednesday afternoon, I came into the office, and my secretary, Claire, said, "Oh, by the way, the mushrooms just arrived. Where are they?" George and Mike took them and keeping the package in their office. I walked down to the hall to their office, but they were gone, and the mushrooms were nowhere to be found. Oh, God, that was frustrating. Damn. This gave me a funny feeling of frustration. The mushrooms had arrived, but I couldn't see them. Out of my hands, out of my control. The next morning, Mike came by my office to chat about the session coming up that weekend. He didn't mention that the mushrooms had arrived. I said, "Oh, by the way, I understand that the package arrived from Sandoz." Mike took a step backward and blinked. "Oh, yes, they came yesterday. Where are they now?" His face darkened and took on a pinched expression. "Well, George and I took them. We didn't want to leave them around." He was embarrassed. Half defiant, I felt irritated. All right. Quote from the Lord of the Rings people. Let's see how this one goes. Gandalf looked again very hard at Bilbo, and there was a gleam in his eye. "I think, Bilbo," he said quietly, "I should leave it behind. Don't you want to?" "Well, yes and no. Now it comes to it, I don't like parting with it at all, and I may say, and I don't really see why I should." "Why do you want me to?" he asked, and curious change came over his voice. It was sharp with suspicion and annoyance. "You are always badgering me about my ring." Huh. Interesting. "I like to look at them." He hesitated and then said, "Okay." A few minutes later, he returned with a brown cardboard box. There were 4 small grey pill boxes inside labeled PS39 and printed on the label, "Not to be sold for research investigation." And there was a plastic stopper and wad of cotton in the neck of the little brown bottle. And then I shook out in my hand the round pink pills, glistening like pearls in my hand. There they were, keys to the doors to perception. I poured them back into the bottle and stuffed the bottle back into the box and said, "Let's keep them here in my filing cabinet." I was sensitive about control of the pills and felt better having them in my office, in my power. Now that I had any intention of using them unilaterally. Not that I had any intention of using them unilaterally. That evening, I had a date with a girl named Juan, and instead of going to the city to dinner, I took her home because I had promised to buy favors and decorations for a big Halloween party, which my daughter was giving the next night. After we shopped and came home, I filled the ice cooler and brought a bottle of whiskey and soda into the study, and we sat drinking until dinner. And every time the whiskey would start to relax me, the kids would get into a quarrel and I bound out to stop it, or the phone would ring and then I'd mix another drink to quiet down again. We had a bottle of Burgundy with the steak, and by dinner's end, I was feeling a fine alcohol stupor. In the living room, Juan was lying in front of the fire, and a friend, Joe O'Donnell, had come in and was mixing drinks, and we started joking and laughing at O'Donnell's crazy stories. Then Rona and Charlie came down from the third floor to join the noise. They were the young couple who took care of the house, pretty little blonde Rona and big happy Charlie, finishing in his 4th year at Boston University. After a while, we fell talking about the mushrooms. Right from the start, O'Donnell had been amused and worldly about the research. This shocked me. He was a scientist and serious about studying behavior, and here he was taking a casual attitude towards the mushrooms. The hell with all this phony talk and measurement business. Let's get the mushrooms and start swinging. Oh my God, man. The word swinging, it could, never mind. You know what? I think you know what I mean when what came from mind as I had the term swinging. Oh dear. O'Donnell was talking along the way, hard-boiled and cynical, and then he popped the question that brought me up. Sure, why don't we have some mushrooms right now? Big Charlie had been hearing all this mushroom talk for days, and he just jumped at this suggestion. Hey, that's a great idea. Let's try them out tonight and see what happens. I've been lecturing all year on research, philosophy, and ethics, and how you should be collaborative and not use your position as a scientist to get an unfair advantage, and about sharing information and sharing the power to make decisions with the subjects. And that was the way we had set up the mushroom research collaborative all the way. No pulling rank. Everyone taking turns at giving mushrooms and taking them. Now, O'Donnell's suggestion that we take the pills without the rest of the team present complicated everything I had been saying, and the agreement we had made with the rest of the group. Besides, it will be a useful pilot study. We can try out a small dosage and see what happens and pave the way for a better session Sunday. That's right, said Big Charlie. We'll be guinea pigs for the rest of them. O'Donnell was looking at me coolly. God damn it, don't be so square. You'll ruin the whole mushroom business if you try to make it rigid and organized and scheduled. In life, you're either spontaneous or you're nothing. Huh. That sort of hits home a little bit for me because I guess in a lot of respects, if we stick too rigidly, it's hard to actually break out of patterns. And I think that's a really big thing that you should probably be a bit more spontaneous. Because I have a problem with not being able to do that in my life. And I would say, yes, you should actually be a bit spontaneous. Go and try different things, even if you don't think you'd like it in the beginning. As long as it's different. Change is always good. So, yeah. All right, let's continue. Spontaneous, that was some word. About 2 weeks before, I had been standing around at a cocktail party in Middleton, and composer John Cage walked up and asked if I wanted to try this. I wanted to try his mushrooms, and I laughed and thought it was a joke, kidding about my mushroom obsession, and I said sure, and he led me out into the kitchen, and there on a plate were some sliced and broiled mushrooms, delicious with butter and salt. John told me about the fun of mushrooms, ordinary non-trans mushrooms that you eat, and how spontaneity was the key. Spontaneity was the key. Fuck's sake. You could go to a forest glade for 10 days in a row and not see a mushroom, and then on that 11th day, or it might be the first day for you, there they are, the mushrooms pushing up through the soil. So far as you can see them growing. the magnificent intersection in space-time, you and the mushrooms. And you have to be there at the exact hour, because if you're a few hours late, then you're too late and the rot has set in on the insects and have started eating them. It's the spontaneity, the planless meeting, that the thing you can't push or hurry. I think it's just pointing to the fact that, like, strike while the iron's hot and be spontaneous about opportunity and all that other kind of thing. Otherwise, it can slip out of your hands. And I think that's sort of the same thing when it comes to mushrooms, because they'll die pretty quickly in a lot of respects. So, what troubles you? Why hesitate? Why is your heart oppressed by cowardice? Why do you lack in courage and zeal when I myself do prophesy such good? From Dante's Inferno. Not a single word about the positive unconscious. No attempt to help the patient to open himself to the life force of the Buddha nature. And no attempt even to teach him a little more conscious in his everyday life. So when O'Donnell started this talk, that I'm square and rigid and you got to be spontaneous, well, it stopped me short. The last thing in the world I wanted to be was a worrying square, and the last thing I wanted to put down was spontaneity. So I worked out the quick compromise in my mind that I'd give them the mushrooms and let them have the experience. But it wouldn't take them, and so maybe I'd protect my contract with the absent researchers. For by your arguments you have disposed my heart to such an eagerness to go that by my first intent I have returned. Lead on, poet. We got in my car and drove down to Cambridge. I parked in front of the office and went in for the pills. I came back out to the car carrying a glass of water, and it was agreed that everyone takes 2 pills right away in the car so that the high could start building up on the way home. I would not fucking recommend that in today's world. The literature on mushroom research suggested using doses of 8 milligrams. Each pill was 2 milligrams, so that when they took 2 pills, they were taking half of a normal dose. O'Donnell suggested starting slow with half a dose and then taking the rest later if it was going well. There was no reaction in the car, and after we were settled in front of the fire, O'Donnell and Big Charlie and Juan took 2 more, and after an hour, when the effect was working hardly at all, Juan took 2 more, and Charlie O'Donnell took 3 more, and I took 2 myself. The dosage for the group was 4 milligrams for me, 12 for Juan, and 4 for Charlie and O'Donnell. Milligrams doesn't seem right. You need way fucking more for psilocybin generally, unless it was like purified and they separated the psilocybin of like the actual compounds itself and without having the mushroom. After about an hour and 50 minutes, it started to hit. Well, checks out. That seems about right. Charlie started seeing the room in wonderful technicolor and began to pace up and down through the house, raving about the beauty, the texture, the delicate shades. His wife, Rona, was watching him amused and a bit scared. Charlie was an ex-football guard, not an intellectual person, and never sensitive to beauty. Here he was moving around possessed, chanting poetry about the shadows on the rug and the subtle play of light on the wall. I was lying on the couch, feeling good from the mood and the 2 pills and urging Charlie on and laughing happily at him. Juan came over and curled up in my arms and said she felt wonderful and how glad she was that I was there to take care of her. That left poor O'Donnell alone in the molecular structure of the psychedelic group. The lone atom whirls out of orbit. He was the only one not going along with the happy spirit. It can happen sometimes that way. It's unfortunate. Face black with frown and wild-eyed look. He was engaged to a girl in Seattle and missing her a lot and sick with love and loneliness and worry about the romance, and he seemed to be falling apart under the mushrooms. Everything gets intensified lover or loneliness. O'Donnell was sitting next to me on the couch, muttering and letting out weird laughs. He turned to us and smiled an evil sort of smile and spit on the rug. Oh no, bitterness. Now, under any circumstances, this is a showstopper. The sudden violent act smashing through the social fabric. But under mushrooms, shock comes even stronger. Underwater calm and bliss shattered by rude spit. He had our attention all right. Our eyes were riveted to him as he reached down and took a package of cigarettes. He began to shake the package so that the white cylinders fell into a crazy pile on the coffee table. Again, like the spit, it was nothing more than a slight eccentric gesture, but sent a creepy chill running through me. Yeah, you got to be careful who you trip around, man, because like if you're around the wrong people, it can just absolutely fucking ruin everything. And that's never fun. O'Donnell turned to me with a weird grin. Order, order, down with order. Again, I felt the chill. Everything was going so mellow and smooth, and the mushroom piece was so fun that I was surprised to see O'Donnell getting worked up. Nothing seemed important at the moment except the loving calm. The idea that people were worked themselves up, worrying about things, little things especially, was amusing. O'Donnell, I said, it's all great. I had a girl and he didn't. He looked at me strangely and took his fist and pounded it in his hand and kept twisting and turning his fist in his hand. And he got up and walked to the bathroom, and I could hear him urinating. One was thirsty, the mushroom first, the dry throat of vision, so I went to the kitchen. Big Charlie standing by the refrigerator, he turned with a look of ecstasy. Look at this room. See those walls glowing? It's seething with color. And look at these peaches. Look at that red blush on the yellow. They're glowing. They're alive. Dad, burn it. Those peaches are alive. They can talk. Rona walked into the room with a question on her face. What's going on? Your husband is talking to the beautiful peaches. Laughter. Charlie looking down at Rona. Honey, if you could only see yourself, why? The way you look, so fresh and wet. You look just like a newborn chicken just coming out of its shell. I looked at her. I could see what he meant. Blonde, yellow, and fresh and young. Laughter. Charlie was looking at me with wonder. You're beautiful, he said. Your face is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. Those lines in your face and your hair, the blue and grey, look like a halo. Rona was laughing too. She started out the door. Go tell Juan that Charlie thinks I'm beautiful and that I have a halo. Charlie back talking to the beautiful peach. It was a great peach with its red patch and the fuzzy yellow glow. Then O'Donnell at the door still had the funny secret smile. Looked down at the kitchen knife on the table. That's what we need, a knife. Picked it up and looked around. In front of his face was the kitchen lamp hung from a long cord. O'Donnell snarled and slashed at the cord with the knife. Ooh. Horror and violence in paradise. O'Donnell, for God's sake, behave. He laughed. Behave. That's what you want me to do? Behave. Be good. O'Donnell walked around the table toward Charlie with the knife in his hand. Some scene. Charlie's face was a picture. Disbelief. Fright. O'Donnell, for God's sake, put that knife down. You scare me waving that knife at me. O'Donnell laughed. That's what we need. Knives. Fear. Better than order. Threw the knife on the table. Big clatter noise. I walked back out to the fire. Juan put her head in my lap. I missed you. Great abiding peace, sitting close together, the good old love pill. No talk, fire watching, noise behind us, Big Charlie and O'Donnell. Hey, Charlie and I want more pills. The two of them look so worried. They want. Funny notion to want. Who wants anything except peace and love? They want more pills. Oh dear. Also, the demand annoyed me, and the old power thing. I had 2 pills in me and was happy. They had 7 in them and wanted more. I guess it can't happen that way. You just wanted to see how far you can rip the veil back, and that's always extremely tempting. And sometimes it's a bad idea, and maybe there's a reason why sometimes the medicine doesn't work. Look, it's 2:30. The party is going great. Why not ride with it? Enjoy it. Don't worry about pills. Does it really matter? Do the pills really matter? One must... Okay, yeah. Here comes a I Ching thing. One must not unresistingly let himself be swept along by unfavorable circumstances. Not permit his steadfastness to be shaken. He can avoid this by maintaining his inner light while remaining outwardly yielding and tractable. With this attitude, you can overcome even the greatest adversities. Yeah, I think that's actually sort of an interesting one, because I think people tend to have that whole be like water, go with the flow, to be more like, just completely yield, just let yourself where the wind takes you. Be like a fucking plastic bag in the wind and just go wherever the fucking wind takes you. That's not good. That's not good either. You still need to actually have some kind of structure. Be like a bird. I think it's better, a bird actually. And it's interesting when we talk about the symbolism of birds, especially eagles, and they're quite prominent in a lot of occult symbolism, is that the bird, while they can't completely go against the wind, they sort of use it to their advantage. They'll bank in a certain way. Kites, they'll sometimes pick up pockets of heat, and it would elevate them up, and they would go up further. Someone would use the tailwind to propel them further and to go faster. Do it that way, not through the sense of just letting it take you wherever the fuck. Yeah, you get what I mean. Charlie sent me his eye and looked sheepish. Yeah, you're right. It's late night, and why worry? Charlie walked off. If I'm going to look out the window and read those lights, he said. But O'Donnell didn't move. He stood lurching above me. His face was twisted with rage. Fuck, that's scary. Yeah, you got to be so careful who you're with. He stood lurching above me. His face was twisted with rage. You've got those pills, and I want them. Are you going to give them to me, or do I have to start trouble? Control. His face scared me. Animal leer. His lips drawn back and his teeth were wolf fangs. Trying his best to look fierce, he was succeeding, looked fierce. As a matter of fact, I'd never seen anyone in my life so dangerous. Same time, made me laugh. How could anyone get so upset, get so worried, get so worked up about anything so inconsequential as a few more pills? Did it matter? Did anything matter except peace and love? O'Donnell, for God's sake, relax, swing with it. The leer, bared fangs, face wolfish and the devil. Voice low and ominous. I'm going to have those pills or there'll be trouble. I laughed. Threats. Pills. Trouble. What words? Those aren't mushroom words. Felt strong because I felt so moral. He was foolish to want and need and suffer and threaten. Smart. Wise. Good me. O'Donnell gave me one last snarling look and turned on a heel and went upstairs to bed. Glad to see him go. Done, O'Donnell. Charlie paced back and kept up his funny raving about the beauty. He had changed, more confident, coming on like a greater teacher of men. The beauty and the colour, and now I see what artists are trying to do, trying to get it all down on canvas, the way it glows and throbs and lives. Good old footballer Charlie suddenly become lecturer on art, giving us the aesthetic chalk talk, and happy too, pacing, raving, looking with wonder, throbbing out his arms, wanting to embrace the whole scene. Rona, if you could only see it, and I'm so happy this is utopia. It's heaven. Why do we have to come back? Why can't it always be this way? Yeah, fuck. Yeah, that's one of the sad things about, I guess, psychedelic states is like you just want to be in like that state for forever, and because of the beauty, and it's sort of sad coming down in a sense. Charles goes off in the dining room to dig the folds of the curtains. Juan stays there under my arm, peaceful and quiet. Then after a while, the sky through the windows begins to lighten. And Juan says it's time to go, and we take the long, slow, winding drive down the Charles Bank. My right hand holding her hand, and on her front steps, we stand watching, and the first sunlight caught in the tree leaves. It was all about as fresh and clean and lovely as you could want. I had 2 hours sleep and then rushed back to Cambridge to meet a class. As I went by the main office, I left word that I wanted to see Mike and George as soon as possible. I wanted to see them right away to tell them about the pilot study session. I was still worried about jumping the gun about using the mushrooms without their knowledge. After the class, Mike was waiting in my office, and we sat down, and I told him the whole story about my indecision, about my not wanting to be square, about O'Donnell, about Charlie, about Yone, and me feeling so close. He didn't like it at all. Oh, that's unfortunate. He didn't like our using the mushrooms so frivolously. Late at night, after drinking in a party fashion, all very unscientific. Rigidness of scientists, maybe. It's interesting because I'm sort of studying to become a scientist, and maybe I ought to not be like the ones that Leary is talking about. In the issue of trust and responsibility, couldn't I be depended upon? Was I so easily influenced? All very unscientific and non-collaborative. Oh, there you go. I apologized and said I felt bad about not informing George and him. But also that I was glad it happened because we had learnt a lot. First of all, about the dosage. It was clear that the articles in scientific literature were way off. Way off. Okay, there you go. The psychiatric studies had been using 4 and 5 pills. Here we had taking 6 and just feeling cozy. And here was Charlie taking 7 and just getting sensitized to beauty, not coming anywhere near the deep visions and the falling down through the floor, through the earth's surface, down into the well of time the way we did in Mexico. And the second thing we learned was timing of dosage. People could start with moderate amounts like 2 or 3 pills and then increase the dosage at their own speed so that they could control it themselves and not suddenly clobbered by a big first dose. And then two, it was obvious that observers could take small doses as well so they could go along parts of the way with the visionary voyages. I explained to Mike that it was inevitable that Charlie and Rona be made part of the group eventually. We could keep them out of the mushroom scene taking place on the premises. Mike remained disapproving, wrenching every drop of guilt from the dark raisin of my remorse. But after I apologized, he was touched and at the end, he wrung my hand in forgiveness. After Mike left, O'Donnell came by my office and I told him about Mike's punitive wrath. He nodded, cool and wise. Sure, I understand the whole thing. It's those damn research meetings we've been having. Everyone gets all worked up, anxious. They want to take the trip and they are scared to take the trip. The whole research business is fake anyway. There's too much fear around. This society is run on fear. So it turns out that even research ran by fear is also incredibly inefficient and counterproductive. Just like running everything else on fear is dumb. Research is a phony ritual to counteract fear of the mystery. There you go. We should keep this thing secret. Have a good time with these mushroom pills. Learn with them. You can research ecstasy except on yourself and on your friends. And all this collaborative research bullshit. How are you going to collaborate or have a good time with people who are afraid of fun and ecstasy and keep using science as a defense? Damn, man. Fuck. Can you imagine? Yeah, using your big fucking brain and your intellect to rationalize all the bullshit and that kind of thing. I knew he was right. It was some residual conformist, prudish cop-out feeling of mine to want to have ecstasy above ground, to make the joyous mystery public and socially acceptable. It was hard for me to accept the fact that you can't surrender to God's grace and win a Sunday school merit badge at the same time. Another thing, said O'Donnell, there's the power thing. Mike was sore because we went ahead last night without him. Well, that's the way it's going to be. Everyone who isn't tripping himself because he's too scared or tired is going to resent our doing it. Sex, drugs, fun, travel, dancing, loafing, you name it. Anything that's pleasurable is going to bring down the wrath of the power control people. Damn, we are really hitting it home this time. So this is a really fucking important thing. Actually, revelry is so fucking important in our lives, guys. I cannot stress it enough because I think a big part of why I was miserable for a lot of my early life is because I never engaged in any forms of revelry or any forms of meaningful revelry. And the idea of seeing people joyous and living their lives, and so because what that does is it breaks boundaries and all that other kind of thing in terms of consciousness, such as traveling with new experiences, new hedonic experiences, and not instead of dedicating yourself to God, you become harder to control. Pure and simple. And if you have more experience, you're much harder to control. Because it's not just experience through things such as pain and suffering and all that other kind of thing that is necessary for the edification of our being. It's also some of the more pleasurable seeking activities. Yeah, so drugs, travel, dancing, making music, writing literature, engaging in orgies, if that's your thing. Yeah, same thing. Because the essence of ecstasy and the essence of religion and the essence of orgasm, and they're all pretty much the same, damn, is that you give up power and swing with it. Swingers. Swingers, swingers, swingers. Damn. And the cats who can't do that end up with the power and they use it to punish the innocent and happy. They'll try to make us look bad and feel bad. Yeah, and they can make it sound bad too. Can't you see the headlines they could have written about last night's trip? Profs lure girls to drug parties. Or how about this? One professor's co-eds nabbed in drug raid. Wasn't that what Mike was doing to your head? I said, well, we are supposed to be scientists and we used the drugs last night in an informal social situation. We gave the drugs to our friends. Drugs! Listen to that word! Drugs! Oh no! The humanity! Ha ha ha! This country is hysterical about drugs. The word is a symbol more powerful than sex or communism. Damn, this last paragraph is going off. To the average American, the word drug means doctor disease or dope degenerate. Damn. But underneath, everyone knows that the key to the mystery of life is chemical. The elixir, the magic potion, the holy communion, the alchemist's powder. Fuck, man. Are you listening to this? This is incredible. And everyone who wants to keep the status quo going is alarmed by the word drug. I was thinking of Lola, the Mexican maid, running across the lawn, crossing herself in fear. Fear of the mushrooms. I was fear in the double dose from within and without. The fear of taking the trip and going out of my mind, and the fear of the wrath of the control people who were opposed to others taking the trip. I was climbing on the tightrope to walk from the next 7 years. I was scared by the freedom O'Donnell was defending, and afraid of the pro-social forces which attack freedom. Damn, man, that is something else. That is something else. I'm really glad I did it today, because I was actually thinking about not doing it, because this is actually one of the most important things. Yeah, ecstasy, guys. It's important. You need ecstasy in your life. If you don't, you're going to be a fucking miserable cunt, and you're going to be under control by a lot of people. So there you go. And you know what? In a way, I feel a weird sense of indignation after hearing that too. Because, yeah. But let's continue. In a time of darkness, it is essential to be cautious and reserved. One should not needlessly awaken overwhelming enmity by inconsiderate behavior. In such times, one ought not to fall in with the practices of others. Neither should one drag them sensuously into the light. In social intercourse, one should not try to be all-knowing. One should let many things pass without being duped. Interesting. Any psychedelic session confronts you with the paradoxes that many have struggled with for thousands of years, and the innocent little trip proposed by O'Donnell had been a 4-year college education. It destroyed my hopes that the mushroom pill was an automatic love revelation pill. Yeah, so that is a pretty heavy thing, because it can reveal a lot of darkness as well, a lot of negativity. And in fact, with my experiences with them, they actually first brought out heaps of negativity. I didn't feel love and hope and all that other kind of thing. I actually for a time felt much more bitter, much more angry, and much more indignant about my situation initially. So it could be that. And yeah, for a second, I actually sucked even more. But that's a part of the process. So there's that. This was a disturbing discovery. I'll write that in that timestamp. This is a pretty good section, man. Fuck. There seem to be equal amounts of good, God, and devil, or whatever you want to call them, within the nervous system. Psychedelic drugs just open the door to the magic theater, and the stages and drama you encounter depend on what you are looking for, your state of mind when you begin, the pressure of your traveling companions. The terrible truth began to dawn, and no, I didn't want to face it, that our consciousness creates the universes we experience. We are the architects of the celestial and hellish stages we act upon. I began to get a sinking feeling. Psychedelic drugs don't solve any problems. They just magnify, mythify, clarify the jewel-like sharpness of the basic problem of life and evolution. Damn. I began to feel the frustration of the guy who invented the wheel at that horror moment when he realized it could be harnessed to any damnable human game, to a war tryout, to a bulldozer, to a Las Vegas roulette table. The old games will always be with us. Spontaneity versus control, freedom versus structure, love versus isolation. The stage sets get bigger. The energy moves faster. Our insight into the divine plan becomes more awfully detailed. The razor's edge of paradox begins. So he's essentially saying opposites generate each other. Basically, equal and opposite reaction. So computers, while we're much more connected, our privacy is more compromised. With AI, with the emergence of AI, it could be the greatest equalizer for education, search engines, and other things, but it could also be one of the most horrifying things that we could have ever come across. So things like the wheel is no different. Or roads even. Roads have been used to transport horrible things. It is used to quickly get to us when we might not need it. So keep that in mind. And it was the same when the printing press first came about. Actually, because monks were first usually like the arbiters of knowledge, and of course mystery adepts, and coming across books was a very was actually a bit of a privilege, and having access to a library was actually a very, very, very big deal. But what ended up happening with the printing press is not only was it able to spread knowledge more quickly and enlightenment, but also it was a very effective way of spreading propaganda and deceit and lies. And the internet, it's the same thing. It is fucking fantastic source of information, but it's also one of the greatest sources of deceit, lies, delusion, amongst all other things. So you got to choose your way. You got to choose your way. Writing so many timestamps down, man, because I think this section alone was useful, and I might make a separate section of it later, because that was a trip. Anyway, stage set gets bigger, the energy moves faster, our insight into the divine plan becomes more awfully detailed. The razor edge of paradox remains. The thunderstorm has the effect of clearing the air. The superior man produces a similar effect when dealing with mistakes and sins of men that include a condition of tension. He forgives misdeeds just as water washes everything clean. And the quizzical smile of O'Donnell remained. Darkness of the light. In adversity, it furthers one to be persevering. Think we came to an end here. And there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Trip number 5. We will do that next time. Man, that was something else, actually. I almost want to actually wait until the 5th trip and then go do other things, because that was a trip and a half, especially the last, what looked like to be 11 minutes. That was incredible, man. I don't know what else to say about that. Anyway, thank you. I am yours truly, Baphomet. Hit the like button, share, subscribe to my Substack, and I will see you guys later. Bye for now.